Back at the start of my PC flipping journey, my go-to budget combo was always one of the old Xeons that you could pair with an LGA 1150 motherboard, or Intel 4th generation motherboards. They were dirt cheap, reliable, and honestly, still even capable of playing esports even to this day. Maybe something I'll revisit in a future video. But after building the Luz, which I love for its upgradability, I wanted to find something even cheaper, something closer to the price of something like an Xbox Series S, for people that just want to dip their feet into PC gaming without breaking the bank. That led me to here, the X99 combo. So what even is an X99 combo? In short, it's repurposed server grade hardware. Usually a motherboard, a Xeon CPU, and RAM bundled together, and sold for ridiculously low prices on AliExpress. You'll see names such as like Machinist, Zeus, and a few others selling them. It's basically old workstation gear that's been given a second life. And it sounds amazing for the money, and it usually is, but somewhat of a catch. I've tried a few of these over the years, and some turned up completely dead. Others booted once and just completely bricked themselves, and others just completely refused to boot or even recognize RAM properly. So yeah, it's been a bit of a gamble. Sometimes you hit gold, and sometimes you get a very expensive doorstop. I've given up looking for my perfect cheap option, but tried one last roll of the dice. This time I went with the Soyo X99 combination, and to be fair, this one actually came through. Soyo are actually one of my brand partners under Maxon, but I'd say this either way. It's the first X99 board that I've had work perfectly straight out of the box. No weird BIOS issues, stable RAM support, and most importantly, it came with a CPU cooler bracket, which most of these annoyingly don't. And that's huge, because if you don't get that bracket, it becomes really difficult to actually find a compatible CPU cooler that would fit. And I found that the hard way. I started to build one live on stream, only to find out I didn't actually have the bracket to install the CPU cooler that I'd purchased. So I had to end the stream before I'd even started. So yeah, props to Soyo for actually including this one. And in the long term, I plan to stock these boards on my own website, so I can properly warranty them should you have any issues. But for now, you can grab them directly off AliExpress, and I have links in the description down below, as well as a cooler that will be compatible. It's an affiliate link, so it helps support the channel whilst it's still growing. The case I'm using right now is a CiT Overseer, which is actually really nice for the money. Layout, decent airflow, RGB, and all that good stuff. But honestly, I would say if you're just trying to build it cheap right now, just grab whatever case you can find that's super cheap. Usually you can even find some locally that are even being given away for free, or just dirt cheap. I would say do that for your first starter PC, and then you can always upgrade to a much nicer case somewhere down the line if you do find you're enjoying it. And funny enough, I've got a bunch of spare cases and power supplies in my garage that I really need to get rid of, so I thought what better way than to pair it with something cheap like the X99 and sell them cheap over Christmas so people can get a nice entry-level PC for a nice price. Much better than everything going to e-waste. Alright, so here's what's actually running in the system. It's using a Xeon E5-2630 V4, which is pretty typical on one of these X99 bundles that you'll find. At the time of the recording, you can grab the full X99 combination, so that's the motherboard, CPU, and the RAM, for about £44 delivered. In addition, I also added an extra 16GB stick from eBay just to get dual channel memory, because typically they only come with one. So I'd recommend finding the exact same matching memory and ordering a second kit if it only has one as an option. The GPU I went with is an RX 5500 XT 8GB model. I picked these up locally a few years ago for around £70 each, and they've just been sitting in storage, so I just wanted to make good use of them. These days you can roughly pick them up for about £70 to £90 on eBay, depending on the condition. And honestly, for that price, you're getting one of the best 1080p budget-friendly cards. The other option you could also go for is a GTX 1660 Super, and you might find actually better performance in certain scenarios. So the nice thing is with the RX 5500 XT, it has 8GB of VRAM as opposed to the 1660 Super's 6GB. So good in some scenarios compared to the 1660 Super, but worse in others, of course. There are some other caveats, of course. Power efficiency isn't great. Xeon chips weren't designed in mind for modern day gaming, and they pull far more power compared to something like a modern i3 or Ryzen 5. You also notice higher idle power draw, so it's not a system you'd want running 24/7. For budget-friendly gaming or flipping for a profit, that trade-off's more than worth it, I would say. Thermals were actually better than expected. With a basic tower cooler and a bit of airflow, CPU stayed well under control, and the RX 5500 XT handles itself perfectly fine. It's one of the reasons I like these lower-end AMD cards for cheap builds. Reliable temps, stable drivers, and good overall efficiency for the money. In terms of gaming, this combination does exactly what you'd hope to for the price. It handles some modern titles at 1080p, especially if you tweak a few settings, and it's perfect for those well-optimized esports titles that most people tend to play anyway. Smooth, consistent, and totally capable. You want to see how it performs, right? Here's some benchmarks. Here on Apex Legends, using the competitive settings, It's getting around an average of 117 FPS. I was actually able to rattle off a few kills. Pretty nice experience and perfect for kind of esports competitive. Here on Fortnite, using the pro settings, getting an average of 153 FPS with the 1% lows sticking around the 63 mark-ish. I was able to also get some kills on here, so nice experience overall. Perfect again for esports competitive. On Marvel Rivals, a competent, not ultra high FPS experience, but more than playable, I would say, averaging around 70 FPS. This is with recommended settings with FSR 3 enabled, but no frame generation. You could enable frame generation to get more FPS, but of course that might have a hit on your latency. You're going to have a nice experience, I would say, generally, for this game. In a pretty difficult game to run, this is Helldivers 2 running with low settings at 1080p. This is it's not a terrible experience, hovering around the 60 FPS mark. It doesn't really venture over higher, and it can sometimes dip into the 50s depending on what's going on screen. For Helldivers, I think this is more than adequate. You're not going to need 144 FPS kind of gameplay for Helldivers typically. 60 is more than enough, I think, to get around the map without any issues. On CS2, which is now a very intensive game on the CPU, more or less, we're getting an average of about 81 FPS, sometimes sliding into the 60s, sometimes going above that. It's a really difficult game to run. This is using the recommended competitive settings for this setup. You could maybe drop it down to 720p, or arguably even go to 1440p if you had a 1440p monitor, and you might get more FPS, strangely enough. But it's a playable, but maybe not a spectacular experience, especially if you're trying to play competitive CS2. Here on Cyberpunk, using mostly medium settings with FSR enabled, we're getting around 45 FPS. Of course, this is like the modern day Crysis, so it's pretty difficult to run in most setups, but decent enough experience. And again, I think for single player, you're not going to have too many issues. You could maybe change a few settings to get it nearer to 60 overall average, but more than playable, I would argue. On Warzone, with the competitive settings at 1080p, we were getting an average of around 62 average FPS. Playable experience, you could potentially crack on FSR 3 frame generation if you wanted to get to the higher FPS numbers. Of course, that would have a hit on the latency as well as maybe cause some shimmering issues, depending on how you like to play your game, really. But as you can see, I was able to get a kill and get around the map fairly quickly. Not a bad experience overall, but again, you might want to potentially look at upgrading both the CPU and the GPU long term if you wanted to play this. Here we have Battlefield 6 with the recommended settings, getting an average of about 60 FPS, which is not terrible really for a brand new title. Seems that EA put a little bit of work into optimizing it for a lot of systems. A lot better than 2042. This is a decent experience, and I think a really nice way to play Battlefield 6 for the cost that you're paying overall. Just wants to get into PC gaming without dropping a fortune, or you're flipping builds to make a profit. The X99 platform still has a place in 2025. It's not perfect, but it's an amazing entry point that proves you don't need brand new parts to get some solid performance. And honestly, that's kind of what I love about these kind of builds. They show that with a bit of creativity and patience and some smart sourcing, you can still put together something that punches well above its weight. By the way, if you haven't seen my last video, The Truth About Cheap Pre-Built Gaming PCs, I recommend giving it a watch. It breaks down why most budget pre-builts cut corners and usually don't provide good options to people that aren't aware of what they're purchasing.